Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching us this week. And this week we have Tammie Horton with us. Just before we start, I just need to make a quick disclaimer that the content might trigger some viewers because I've known Tammie for 6-8 months, and she is someone who's very, very open. And we're here to talk about abusive relationships, or more commonly known as domestic violence relationships. So this point onwards, we will be using DV because it's much easier. It's such a mouthful, though, domestic relationship. It's such a mouthful. So I shall let Tammie talk to you about what she does for a living because it's very relevant to her experience. And then I'm going to do what I always do, this Facebook business, and then I'll be right back. So off you go, Tammie.
So hello, everyone. So I'm Tammie Horton. I'm the CEO and founder of Phoenix Initiative. I'm a speaker, I'm a coach, and I'm a mental health advocate. So I started my business back in 2018 when I left the public service, where I'd been a public service servant for a very, very long time. And the reason why I started doing this business is because I am super passionate about supporting people who are experiencing psychological distress. So I do say it's mental health training and coaching, but it is a whole spectrum of psychological distress, and people can experience that for a number of different reasons. And one of the reasons, of course, is DV, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But the services I deliver cover the complete spectrum of mental health. So it goes from the positive end of mental health by building people's resilience skills and building them proactively to mitigate any circumstances that might come up that cause our mental well-being to decline. It's about training people in the early intervention space to support people who are struggling with their mental well-being and either experiencing mental health issues for the first time or a worsening of an existing problem. And then there's at the crisis end, so down at the lower end of the continuum, where people have been in crisis, so making sure that they can get some initial support and connecting them up to appropriate professional help. But then what I do is help people when they're coming back on that recovery journey, moving back up the continuum again, having someone that can walk alongside them and helping them with their recovery goals. So I work along the entire spectrum of that. And the reason being is because I have my own lived experience. I experience anxiety. I've been depressed on quite a few occasions. I've been suicidal more than once. And the suicidal thoughts still pop up, even though I'm doing really well. They just sometimes pop up every day. So I have that lived experience. I've cared for family members with mental health concerns. I've been a manager of people who have struggled with their mental well-being. I work in the sector as a support worker for people who have significant mental health concerns. So I'm just super passionate about making sure that people have the skills to be able to live their best lives despite any kind of diagnosis that they might have, but hopefully we can intervene early enough that they don't get a diagnosis. So that's kind of me in a nutshell and what I do.
Absolutely. So you can hear from her introduction that she is definitely very, very much, really into helping people in this mental health space. So today's topic, I'm losing my voice, so apologies. So today's topic is going to span a few different segments. So it will be time stamped. So if you look down into the description, there will be time stamped. So, but I'll also give you a quick rundown. So we're here to talk about domestic violence. There are more than one type. I mean, in my narrow mind, I always thought that it's just always about physical, but it's not. And then, so that's part one. Part two, we will talk about Tammie's story. She's mentioned before that this is a personal journey, and she is very brave to come and share it. So she wants to share how did she actually find herself. Sometimes you don't even know you're in a DV relationship. And then one day you're like, holy shit, how did I get here? So that is part two. Part three is what kept her there. And we know this. Why is it so hard for them to leave? So today we will hear from somebody who has stayed, but has finally found the strength to leave. Naturally, that will segue into the next part, how I left, how to leave an abusive relationship. And then because COVID is still very real in all parts of the world, we will talk about what happens if you are in lockdown in your part of the world. How do you get out? And finally, we will end with what is mental health first aid and how can that help you? So we will now go back and start at the very beginning. So Tammie, can you just share with us what is, there are so many different types of DV. Let's just narrow it down and tell us the very basic types.
Yeah, so there of course is the physical violence that can be involved in DV, and Karen, you're right. Quite often people think it is all about that physical violence that's perpetrated against people in relationships, and it's not just women, it's men as well. People of all, any gender type can experience domestic violence. So there's the physical type of things, there's the emotional abuse. So it can be that, making people feel really loved and then pushed away, keeping people on I envisage a fishing line, and they throw the line out and they hook you in and they reel you in only to drop you, and then throw out the line again and reel you in. There's financial abuse, which is one of the things that I experienced. So financial, emotional, physical, and verbal abuse, of course, as well. So they're kind of the ones that are in my space and what I talk about. So, but there are a couple of others as well, but they're kind of the main ones.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. So share with us, so this part, it's going to be very, very intimate because she is so open to share, because if we don't share, then how do people even know what they're doing and how, so by sharing her story, she wants to tell everyone that this is not a taboo subject. We need to talk about it, and that's how we can learn from it, how we can learn to support other people as well. So please, Tammie, go ahead and share with us your story.
Okay, where to start?
From the beginning.
From the beginning. Oh my God, that's a very long time ago, Karen. Look, I met my partner from this relationship when I was 18. I was set up on a blind date by my father and his father. My dad wanted me to have a partner for my year 12 formal, and he worked with this person who had 4 sons, and he asked him, if one of his sons would like to take me along to my formal, and the only criteria that was given was that he was tall, because I'm a fairly tall person. So that's how my future husband came along, turned up on my doorstep one day. So I was a young person who I'd already been struggling with anxiety and depression as a teenager and self-harm. So I didn't respect myself very much. And I didn't feel like I was good enough. So when he came along, he was very attentive, very loving, made me feel special, and wanted. So he made me feel good. Then we kind of lost touch for a little bit because I, did something as, silly teenagers do that he didn't really like. So he dropped me for a little while. But then he looked for me about 6 months later, and he managed to track me down where I was working, and we started going out. And that's kind of like we continued to go out, and then we ended up getting married and et cetera, et cetera. Now, when I first met him, I knew that he had a diagnosed mental illness. He was very open with that. Wow. But I felt like I could handle it, right? Because I'd never experienced it before. I felt like I could handle it. And even when he had his first the first manic episode with me in the relationship, I got very caught up in the energy of his manic episode, and didn't see that that's what it was that it was experiencing. And then of course then he became more significantly unwell, and we kind of managed it. But I felt like I could deal with that because it was still him. He just had an illness that we were trying to deal with. Yeah. But as the years went on, now I stayed with him for 25 years. As the years went on, he got lots of other physical illnesses on top of his mental health diagnosis. And he began to really struggle with life. right? As the kids came along, he was, you know, he was always striving to be the best he could be in the sales world because he came from a sales background and family. And I think there was an element of competition that he felt like he had to do better than his dad and his brothers. And, you know, so he was always striving to do that. But I was always in the background supporting him with stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I would be staying up until 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, helping him with presentations and still getting up and going to work.
Yep.
So I still got caught up in his life, right, in supporting him, because that's, you know, what a good wife does.
That's it. That's what being in a relationship is all about.
Yeah.
Right. So different from what all of us do. How scary is that?
Yeah. Supporting him. But, you know, becoming so enmeshed in that relationship, you know, I didn't even know who I was when I got married to him, right? So the fact that I didn't know who I was, well, it didn't really matter because I was part of this relationship. Now, because when I first started going out with him, there was a lot of tension between me and my parents. I became quite estranged from my parents because of my relationship with him. They didn't want me to marry him. I was only 20 and 5 days when I got married. So I was very, very young and very naive. But, you know, it's just, and life happens, right? And you get caught up, the children come along and we get involved with that. But then there was all there's things that happened. So I can remember sitting outside the bank, because we moved to Perth for a while. We were sitting outside the bank and we'd gone in to talk about home loans or something. I can't remember what it was that we were talking about, but I can remember sitting outside the bank because I hadn't done something that he thought I should have done. He was berating me, like yelling at me, sitting outside of this bank, and I was in tears, and people were just walking past, just looking. But I'd done something wrong that I didn't even know that I was supposed to do in the first place.
Yeah.
But I was supposed to know. There were things like I was the one that had to take the cars in to be serviced, but I wouldn't get the full picture of what had to be done for the cars. And so then when I brought the car home, I get questioned, well, did you get this fixed? Did you get that fixed? And it's like, I didn't know I had to get that done. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we talked about it. No, did we talk? I don't remember you talking about it. So he started to make me feel like I was going a bit nuts. And, you know, I was struggling. I had 3 kids under the age of 5. I did suffer postnatal depression at one point. So, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff that went on in our relationship which is just messy. And I lost sight of who I was. And I didn't feel like I could go to my family because, you know, they would judge me for marrying him in the first place. Mm-hmm. His family was fractured, to say the least, at the best of times. And so I didn't feel like I could really go to them either. I was never a person who had a huge number of friends. So I felt very isolated and didn't know where to turn. And the only thing that was my respite was work. So I go to work and I do a good job at work, and then that would give me a bit of relief, although I'd get multiple phone calls a day when I'm at work about all sorts of different bits and pieces. And then I'd come home and have to, you know, pick the kids up from daycare and do all this type of stuff. And, you know, it's just, he stopped working back in the year 2000. So I was the sole income earner with these young kids, but I would still have to take kids to daycare because he said he wasn't well enough to look after the kids. Yeah. And then I'd come home after a day of work and I'd have to cook the meals and do the cleaning. But the house was always a mess. So if I was trying to clean the house up, then I'd get in trouble because I wasn't spending time with him because I hadn't seen him all day. Yet then when I was spending time with him, I was getting in trouble because the house was a mess. Wow. And my house was in chaos, and what I refer to it as, it can't have anyone over syndrome, right? It was chaos because I had Mount Washmore on the lounge of all this washing that never got folded. There was always dishes that needed to be washed. There was just, you know, young kids, the house is a mess. My mother-in-law was quite a perfectionist, so I would dread her coming over because there'd be all this judgment. So I just didn't know who I was. I was mentally unwell myself. You you know, and then I got to a breaking point when I ended up getting a bully for a boss. So I had no respite then. And, you know, that was a time that I was suicidal, but I had to go and see the doctor and do something, because if I didn't, my kids would be without their mum. And, you know, so it's just, there's just so much stuff in that. But it was, even though I was the main income earner and I was a middle level public servant and earning, you know, a good amount of money a year, I only had $100 a fortnight that I was able to spend on myself that was allocated to me. And then I would have to explain what I did with my $100. And if I didn't have money left over at the fortnight, then what was I spending my money on? I'd have to let him know if I was going to be late home from work, or if I forgot to ring, I'd get in trouble. There's just so many elements that I felt like I was controlled. And if I didn't know what I was doing that was wrong, because no matter what I did, if I did it the way he wanted it, it was wrong. And then if I did it the other way, well, then it was wrong. But there was a whole bunch of his stuff mixed in with that he wasn't necessarily getting sorted out. Even though he was compliant with taking medication and all that type of stuff, he still wasn't doing the work to fix himself.
That's right.
And so I stayed trying to fix him. And the sad thing is, and I am going to get a bit emotional, he passed away just recently. And I just stepped back into the role of, you know, organising everything for him, because he's still the dad of my kids.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Deep down, I still love him to this day, but I couldn't live with him. And so now I have to deal with a whole bunch of guilt because I left. And even though I know I had to leave, but, you know, there's just 50 million layers of emotion now that I have to deal with because of everything that went on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So at which point did you realize that this is abuse?
There's quite a few times through that 25 years that I was with him, or 26 years that I was with him, that I recognized it was abuse. I knew it wasn't right, that, you know, I would get yelled at, that I would get things thrown in my direction, not necessarily
not hitting target.
But it's in my direction. And so, you know, his aim only had to be off and things would have hit me. You know, being held on to so tight on your arms and just being shook by a person who's much bigger than you and can look quite menacing. I am grateful that he never hit me. But it's interesting that I think if he had hit me, I wouldn't have stayed. Yet all the other abuse all the other abuse I was prepared to stay, but I don't even know whether I would have anyway, because of, you know, the reasons which, you know, you're going to ask me in a minute about why I did stay.
Yeah.
But so there are lots of times through there that I recognised it was abusive, but I couldn't get out. I had no idea how to get out, where to go, because I was so isolated.
That's right. So as you were telling us your story, there is so many hallmarks. So when I hear stories of DV relationship, usually they're isolated. A lot of the times they start young as well. And they usually also, the case being, they're estranged from the family. So truly they have nowhere to go, which is why they are stuck, or they feel that they are stuck. And yes, we're going to segue into why then did you stay? Because understanding, you know, from our point of view, from the, you know, friends who want to help, it's frustrating for us, because it's like, we can see it, we want you to get out, but yet something is holding you there. Can you just tell us, what is it?
Yeah. So the main reason why I stayed was because he threatened to kill my kids.
Oh. Yeah, okay, that's plenty reason enough. Okay, wow, okay.
So I did leave at one point. It was a time where he went into hospital and I couldn't do it anymore. So I took the kids on the bus up to Sydney to my mum's, and he got out of hospital and came up to Sydney with a friend of his, a friend who I trusted, But he came to Sydney and he took the kids away. Like he took them back from me in Sydney and said, if you ever do that again, I will make sure that neither of us can have the kids. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, I'll kill the kids before I'll let you take them away from me.
Okay. Wow.
So I couldn't then leave, could I?
Yeah, that's right. Because a lot of
In
the
my
times,
mind.
that's
Yeah.
right. But it's if you have nowhere to go and that the threat is very real because you know them, you don't know, at which point they're going to turn and actually do it. You just cannot trust that, they won't,
No.
because there's a real chance, because you hear these stories, the horror stories of the father being estranged with the wife, and then he killed the children, then himself.
Yeah.
So that kind of behavior is so common. It's more common than we think, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was that, I've heard of it happening to other people. So what's to say that it's not going to happen to me?
Correct.
And my kids are my world.
Absolutely.
They still are, even though they're grown women now, they're still my world,
Yeah. Yeah. So, but that is in your case. In your case, there's a really real threat.
Yeah.
That's going to happen in your working experience. So what are some of the reasons that the women don't leave? Besides nowhere to go, the nowhere to go part, I must tell the viewers here that it is very real. A lot of them actually have nowhere to go because they are so isolated that the friends have given up, the family has given up, and they really have nowhere to go. And financially, they have no money.
No money. Well, that's the thing. If you're in a relationship where the money is so tightly controlled, you don't have any money to leave. So how can you afford to pay for rent or even to get a hotel room for a few days? How can you even fill up your car to drive to another city? Like the lack of money is it's just impossible to do. And there's a lot of shame.
Mm.
And I think it's the shame, because a lot of people who are in abusive relationships, they know that it's not good for them and they shouldn't be there and they have to go, but they are so filled with shame for what they've allowed to happen to themselves that they can't see past it.
That's right. I think so too. I really think so too. And the thing also is that you're right. The shame is such a big component because they're so ashamed of asking the friends and letting them down that they dare not ask again. But you'd be surprised though, that the real friends who say, please, I really want to get out, they will.
Yeah.
You would think. If you haven't burned them too often.
Yeah. It's the same in the mental health space, right? We get so ashamed that we can't do it that we can't fix ourselves. It's like, well, I should be able to just snap out of it. I should be able to do this. You can't without help. That's the thing. You can't get out of DV relationships without help, without support. You can't fix your mental health without support. You can't do it on your own. Right. And it's a sad thing in society now is that we're becoming very insular. We don't have communities where, like, it's not that village raising your children. We don't have those villages anymore. Everyone's doing stuff on their own, and then heaven forbid we should have to ask for help because what are people going to say? We're so fearful of judgment. Yeah. And we are a very judgmental society, unfortunately, now. It's like, well, you can't manage on your own. Well, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, that's right.
We're not designed to do it on our own.
We're not. We are not. And we shouldn't be. I mean, then again, I come from a very different place. If you don't ask, you don't get. And if you don't ask, you have nothing anyway. So you literally have nothing to lose. You have nothing to lose. But anyway, that's just, but how about this? Let's get to the next part. How did you eventually leave?
Okay. How did I eventually leave? It took a person at work to notice me. What it was is I noticed that he wasn't coping very well, and I asked if he was all right, because that's what I do, right? I try and help everybody else rather than try and fix myself.
Yes, you do.
yeah, I asked him if he was okay, and we got talking, and he was having some problems in his relationship. And, you know, he knew that I had problems in my relationship, and we got talking and we got very friendly, I guess, is basically it. We got very friendly, and he said, you know, you're an amazing person. You don't need to stay in that relationship. There are lots of other people out there that deserve you more. And it was that realization that other people noticed me, and that I actually was lovable when I didn't feel like I was lovable. And that was kind of a turning point.
Yeah.
And I was starting to do another slide towards being suicidal, and I didn't want to go there again. So I had to get out. The problem was, because of the type of person I am, I don't like dumping things on people at the last minute. I gave him forewarning, didn't I? I said, I let him know that I was leaving at the end of the year, because it was our eldest daughter's year 12. So I didn't want to disrupt her year 12.
Fair enough.
Like getting to the end of year 12. But by letting him know that I was leaving at the end of the year, what did it do? It totally disrupted her end of year 12, because then his behavior escalated.
Yeah.
And I totally realized how broken I'd become, and not anyone that I recognized, when he woke me up at 2 o'clock in the morning one morning and asked me if we could fix the relationship. And I said, no, there's no way we can fix it. And he then proceeded to overdose,
In front of you.
pills in front of me, saying, you're the reason why I'm doing this. And I just rolled over and went back to sleep.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Okay.
he survived that suicide attempt. But I rolled over and went back to sleep. And I can't describe the shame that that's filled me with.
But you've
That
had enough.
I'd become that person. But
I
I'd
know,
had
but
enough.
You just couldn't deal anymore though.
No. And so that, like, I realized I had to get out then, because I could not stay in that relationship, knowing that he was going to go to that point to keep me in the relationship. He would be prepared to be so coercive. And I really want to make this really clear now, that all suicide attempts need to be taken seriously. And it's part of the things that I teach. But I was so broken that I couldn't help him.
Yeah, that's right.
And he did use it as a way of controlling me. And that's not what people who get to that point will do in general. So I really want to make that clear, so that people don't dismiss people's thoughts of suicide, and
Absolutely.
please for help.
Yeah.
Please do recognize I was very, very broken. And as part of the reason why I do this stuff now is kind of to give back to the universe, I guess. Yeah. But I had to get out. But, you know, we got him to the hospital the next day, and there were consequences from his attempt. Like his body didn't do very well. And, you know, the last 7 years have been not very pleasant for him because of that, because his health has declined. Well, he's now passed away, of course, but yeah, it was very, very hard. But then on the 18th of November, I then had to kind of slowly be sneaking stuff into my car and just act like it was an everyday thing. I was taking the kids to school, but I was leaving that day. I wasn't coming back to the house, but he kind of caught me and stood behind the car in the driveway and refused to move. And it wasn't until the kids kind of screamed at him to move out of the way that he moved, and then I left. And luckily I'd reached out to my mum, who had kept a house in Canberra after my dad had passed away. Even though she lived in Sydney, she kept the house just in case I needed it.
Wow.
So I was very lucky that I did have somewhere to go. If she hadn't have done that, I would have been one of those women who had kids living in my car, because I was still responsible for the mortgages and all the bills on the house. So I couldn't afford to rent anywhere.
Wow.
Or,
yeah.
you know, pay for hotels. I had a tax return that was due to come in that had some money on it. So that was kind of my starting nest egg. But, you know, according to him, I stole my own tax return.
Of course you did.
You know,
of course you did.
Yeah. And there was some money that he'd stash away in a filing cabinet, and I took some of that money too. And of course I got accused of stealing, and it's like, well, actually it was my money to start with because I was the one that earned it. So
yeah.
You know, there was a whole bunch of stuff, and he still tried to control me. He would stalk me at my house. He would take the keys from my middle daughter, who was still doing like 50-50. I'd get the locks changed on the house, and then he'd steal her keys and get the keys cut, and he would come into the house, and I'd know he'd been in the house because he'd talk about things that there's no way he could know I would have unless he'd been in the house. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
But back then, you know, I tried to get an AVO, and because he didn't hit me, I couldn't get it.
That's right.
It's changed. The laws have changed now in the ACT.
Yeah.
So when he was trespassing a couple of years ago and he got caught by a neighbour, reported him, there was a whole different chain of events that happened with the police. But I said, no, look, I'm not going there because I've been through that process before, and we already have a couple of legal processes in place. So I'm not putting that pressure on him because that will just make him snap. And I don't know what he will do. He's already in enough trouble. So let's just leave things be. If he does anything again, then we'll move down that path. But
yeah,
you know.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. So what kind of advice would you get? Because like right now, you're in lockdown, right?
No, in Canberra, we're not. We just have to wear masks everywhere we go.
Yeah, okay.
We've been very, very lucky in Canberra that we are not in lockdown, but we hope to stay that way so long as people who are in lockdown don't keep coming to Canberra.
Well, we want people who are in lockdown to just stay away from Victoria as well.
Yes, that's right. You guys do not need another lockdown down there.
No, we don't. But so the amount of, you know, domestic violence that has got cases has gone up, you know, exponentially. I would use that word during COVID, and it is still COVID in many places. What would you say? What is one, you know, what's 3 things that somebody can do?
Okay. One is reach out for some help, because the most dangerous time for anyone who's in an abusive relationship is just after they've left, so you need to have stuff in place before you leave. You need to have some help in place before you leave. Now, there are lots of services out there around Australia, and there is an app that I recommend people to use, which is called Daisy. And it is an app specifically for women, but it has a whole list of services on there. So from crisis accommodation to financial support to counselling services, all sorts of different things that you can reach out for help on. It's got a button at the bottom that you can hit that will immediately get it off your screen, just in case, you know, your partner comes and you don't want them to see what's happening. But start to reach out for help before you leave, so that you've got things in place before you go. Try and have a safe place that you can get away to that's pre-organised, and that you don't tell too many people where it is.
Wow, okay.
It has to be very few, like you have a few people that know, but they have to be your closest confidants, that they're not going to share the information, because when you first leave is the most dangerous time. So
I remember when we were talking about this topic, you talk about, you know, maybe if you could start stashing some money away, that would help.
Yes. If you, but that's if you can, right? Depends on
how tight the leash is.
How tight the leash is. But if you can start to say, put a little bit of money aside. Even every little bit counts. There are some services out there, and this is again why I say reach out to services, because there are services out there that can give you like no interest or low interest loans for money if you're fleeing that space. There can be services that can get you clothes and food all that type of thing. So you need to start laying the foundations before you leave, because it's so much harder if you try and do it after you've left.
Yeah.
Because the connections to things tend to get cut off.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And although DV relationships are, not ideal and it's not good, it's still sometimes people stay because that's the devil,
Yeah.
and they're so scared of going out because that's to the unknown. So
That's
know
right.
this, though, know that it will get better. It is scary outside, but it will get better, and you deserve better. It can get better.
Yeah. And again, that's why you reach out for help beforehand.
That's
so
right.
that you're connected with people who have lived it. So see if you can connect with a support group. So people who have lived it, who can help you get through it when you're at your lowest and you want to go back. Because heaven knows there have been so many times the last 8-9 years that I've thought it would just
be easier
to go back.
That's
because
right.
I've been in a very protracted legal process that's cost me
too much money.
It's cost him too much money, and now as a consequence it's costing my children the money because it's their dad's estate that has to pay for it. For what? It's so it's
right.
really, really important to get that support beforehand. Try and squirrel away a little bit of money. Make sure you've got some connections. You've got a safe place that you can go to. Just reach out for help.
Yeah. So
you do have to reach out for help.
You do have to reach out for help. Yes. And people will help. You'll be surprised. The first person, don't ask again. Ask the second person. Keep asking, because you will get to someone who will help.
Yes.
Yeah. So we will now take everyone to the last part of this interview, which is why Tammie has chosen to do mental health first aid, because she's been there. She understands how important it is, and how is that going to help you regain your balance?
Yeah. Okay. So look, mental health first aid is a skill that everybody needs to have, right? Because everybody has mental health. And because it's on a continuum, like I said at the beginning of this, we have positive mental health and we have negative mental health. And down in that negative space is where mental illness is in play. So mental health first aid is being able to support people all the way along that continuum. Now, when in the DV space, having people that are trained in mental health first aid skills, it means that they're not afraid to hear your story. And it's all about being non-judgmental. So when someone discloses that they've been in an abusive relationship or they've got mental health concerns, being able to sit in their space and listen to what their experience is and empathize with that without any judgment. And it's really hard because human beings are wired to be judgmental. It's part of our fight, flight, response system. We're constantly unconsciously making judgments all the time. So it's really sometimes can be really hard not to be judgmental, but you've got to set it aside. But mental health first aid is, one, being able to sit in the space with someone, hearing what their story is, working out what their immediate need is, and then being able to refer them to the appropriate professional help. Now, it's not always going to be going and talking to a GP or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It could be, particularly in the DV space, having a safe place to stay the night or for the next week or for the next month, having money, so getting connected to a financial service. It could be, getting clothes for your kids because you have to go and leave everything behind, getting food. So the appropriate professional help. And then there's those other supports, which is family, friends, support groups, but things that you can do for yourself. So making sure that you look after, number one, yourself, with, whatever it is that makes you a better person. So whether it's mindfulness, exercise, diet, getting good sleep, yoga, running, whatever it is that you can do for yourself that empowers you and takes the power back that you give away to everybody else, because that's what happens in a DV relationship. You feel like you have no power. So you have to take that back.
Yeah.
And do stuff for yourself. So mental health first aid is for the people that are surrounding those. So I would encourage people, if they're concerned about someone, whether they're in a DV relationship or not, that you can see that they're struggling with life, have a mental health first aid conversation with them, and if you don't know how to have it, contact me and I can talk you through the very, very basics, but go and do some mental health first aid training. It's available all around Australia. There's lots of amazing instructors around Australia that deliver this. But it's a skill that we all have to have, because everybody is impacted by poor mental health at some point in their life.
That's right.
Whether they know it or
agree.
not.
That's right.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And so before we end, I'm going to ask Tammie to drop her contact details in the chat box. And what I want you to know is, although I don't know who else, I know of a few women in DV relationships, and I try my best to try and get them to come and talk, but nobody would dare, even though they've gotten out of it, because like what Tammie has said just now, there's so much shame that how did they even let themselves get there? So if you are looking for someone who's experienced in this area and also very passionate about mental health first aid, she helps children as well. No, not in this chat box, Tammie. Apologies. In the comments section of the video. Worries. Yeah, she will leave her contact details. So if you need anyone, I highly recommend her, because I know that her heart is in the right place, so she will help. Yeah, so with that, we will end today's interview. Thank you so much for sharing so openly.
Thanks, Karen.
You're the first person who said yes to me, and thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
All right, I'll see you guys next week, and we'll be back with another juicy topic. Bye.
Bye.